In a recent episode, I talked about how, when I was younger, I marveled at the way that nature seemed to fit together. The trees and the plants produce the oxygen we breathe, and we help provide them with the carbon dioxide that they require. My young mind imagined someone or something must have designed it to be the way it is. In other episodes, we looked at vestigial traits that an ancient ancestor once possessed, but that's now an unused feature of our evolutionary past, like the remnants of legs buried in a whale. Sometimes those remnants aren't evident, but are hidden only in our genes, only to then reappear unexpectedly in a modern version of a species, like a snake born with hind legs. Vestigial features and atavistic traits are all evidence of our past, glimpses into a species' distant past. But what about my wonder as a child about how it all fit together? Well, that wonder is still there, and we have nature and evolution by natural selection to thank for it. It's amazing. But nature is not perfect. It makes mistakes, and those mistakes are also remnants of a past that once was.
There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
Charles Darwin was born in 1809, and in his youth he also marveled at the wonders of nature and the world around us. When it came time to pass his Bachelor of Arts examination at Cambridge, he later wrote in his autobiography that it was
necessary to get up Paley's evidences of Christianity and his moral philosophy. The logic of this book, and as I may add of his natural theology, gave me as much delight as did Euclid. The careful study of these works, without attempting to learn any part by rote, was the only part of the academical course, which, as I then felt, and as I still believe, was of the least use to me in the education of my mind. I did not at that time trouble myself about Paley's premises, and taking these on trust, I was charmed and convinced of the long line of argumentation.
The Paley he refers to in that passage is William Paley. Paley was an English clergyman who died in 1805, 4 years before Charles Darwin was born. Paley is remembered today as having introduced the world to his watchmaker analogy. For some help with that, I'll turn to English evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins.
Paley likened all living things to a clock or watch. Random forces, he said, cannot explain how all these beautiful springs and gears came together to tell time. Nor can they explain the organs of living things.
It makes sense at face value. If I were to stumble upon, say, a rock in the middle of a field, I wouldn't think anything of it. But if you asked me where that rock came from and who made it, I would just say, hey, it's just a rock. It's a larger stone or a part of a larger stone that was chipped or broken apart over time. Somehow, that rock ended up in the field. Really nothing more to think about. But if I were to stumble upon a watch in the same field and someone were to ask me where it came from, I wouldn't hesitate to say someone made it. Try to tell me that it was blind chance that formed it, like with the rock, and I would point at the gears and the wheels and the watches as evidence that it wasn't pure chance that made it. There's purpose in its design. Now, Paley applied that same logic to nature.
Just as watches require the existence of a watchmaker, so nature requires the hand of an omnipotent designer.
Darwin was fascinated by Paley's line of reasoning, and that fascination led him down a long and winding path into the natural world where he discovered some of its secrets for himself. He would come to find that, as appealing or seductive as Paley's words were, Paley was misguided.
We get used to the idea that evolution is so good at producing beautiful, elegant animals that look as though they've been designed. We forget that sometimes they're not perfect and there are imperfections. And the imperfections are very revealing because they're exactly the kind of imperfections you'd expect from the accidents of history if there were no designer.
I love that line. The accidents of history. Are there accidents? Well, yes, there are too many to mention. But let's go there anyway. We certainly can't cover them all. That would take a series of books, and I don't just mean a trilogy of books. It would require thousands of volumes to document it all. So instead, we'll spotlight a few of these accidents. Now, Paley's watchmaker leaves a lot to be desired. So let's start with our spine. In the episodes that traced our ancient ancestors who followed the hominin river along its many twists, turns, and dead ends, those ancestors weren't always bipedal. Somewhere between 6 and, say, 7 million years ago, they evolved from getting around on all fours to balancing on two legs. The thing is, the curvature of our spine isn't really conducive to bipedalism. It's much better suited for four-legged mobility. And we have another feature that could be much better, our sinuses. The way our sinuses drain aren't that effective, and it leads to problems like sinus infections. And what about our blind spot? Our eyes have a blind spot. It's right where the optic nerve passes through the retina. At that point of connection, it lacks light-detecting cells. And as a result, there's an area of sight lost to us. Our brain is wired to overlook this spot, but it's there. Some other animals, like the cephalopods, have more optimized design where the nerve fibers don't block any part of the retina. When it comes to sight, the octopuses win hands or arms down. Sticking with humans for a couple more examples, there's the vas deferens. The vas deferens are the tubes that carry sperm. Our testes has an interesting evolutionary tale. Now, to be at their most efficient, they work best when kept warm. In cold-blooded vertebrates like lizards and, say, crocodiles, to just name a couple, the testes is located deeper towards the center of the body. That helps keep them warm and at a decent temperature. When warm-blooded traits emerged, it was too warm for the testes to function properly, so they had to move or be cooled down. Evolution solved for this in different ways for different species, but in humans, they were pushed closer to the outside of our bodies, where they ended up in the scrotum. Now, because of the slow evolutionary path it had to take to get there, the vas deferens loops over the ureter instead of a more direct route. Talk about suboptimal design. Now, it wouldn't be the way I would design a human's reproductive system, but it wasn't up to me. Nor would I give men nipples, yet we males of the species have them. They serve no purpose for us, but they're there because in our fetus stage, there is no differentiating between male or female until testosterone is introduced. And that doesn't occur until about the 6th week. Another useless feature that wasn't so useless at one time in the far distant past is the plantaris muscle, and that's the longest tendon in the human body and is present in a little over 80% of us. I probably pronounced it wrong, but it runs along the back of the calf to the Achilles tendon, and it stops there. In our primate cousins, it continues on to the toes, and most likely did in our ancient hominin ancestors. The benefit of it back then, and in monkeys, is to flex all toes at once. And that helps when grasping tree branches, which we no longer do with our feet. But we did at one time, so it's there, but not very useful anymore. In the animal kingdom, William Paley's competent watchmaker fell asleep at the wheel in some other ways. There's the flightless beetle, for example. They have wings, but they can't use them any longer because those wings are fused together. So they spend their entire time and their entire life on the ground. In 1980, American evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould published The Panda's Thumb. The book is a series of essays, and the title essay focuses on pandas and what appears to be a thumb. Well, this apparent thumb allows the panda to grab hold of the bamboo that they love so much. And it makes sense. They need to grasp the bamboo and they need to hold it in place, so why not give them a thumb? One would think Paley's watchmaker would, but instead, nature took care of it in another odd way. It's not a thumb at all. It's an extension of a bone in the wrist. It's not very flexible, but, well, it does the trick. natural selection got there by trial and error. It also had a little fun with giraffes. Again, Richard Dawkins.
There's a nerve called the recurrent laryngeal, which runs from the brain, and its end organ is the larynx, and you think it would just go straight there. But in a human, what it does is goes down into the chest, loops around one of the main arteries in the chest, and then goes straight back up again. Obviously a ridiculous detour. No engineer would ever make a mistake like that.
We are surrounded by design flaws. We have them in ourselves, from the blind spot in our eyes to the fact that we get goosebumps. Have you ever seen the hair of a cat stand on end when it's scared? Well, it's caused by the contraction of tiny muscles located at the base of each hair. It causes the hair to stick up, making the cat appear larger than it is. And that's hopefully to scare off a predator, or to at least make it think twice before attacking. Now, we no longer have long hair, but those tiny muscles still contract in certain situations. Our ancient ancestors, however, did have longer hair, and it did stand on end when scared or excited. So what would Paley say about all this? What would he say about things like the panda's thumb, which isn't a thumb, but a wrist bone instead?
I can hardly imagine to myself a more distinguishing mark, and consequently a more certain proof of design than preparation, of the providing of things beforehand, which are not to be used until a considerable time afterwards. For this implies a contemplation of the future, which belongs only to intelligence.
It seems Paley's watchmaker is more like the hero of the TV show MacGyver, solving problems with paper clips and a bit of duct tape. Or, as Richard Dawkins once wrote, the watchmaker is blind. Pull the curtain away and the watchmaker's revealed to be nature in all of its magnificent glory and wonderfully flawed designs. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Evolution Talk. I'm Rick Coast, and if you find value in this show, please consider supporting it at evolutiontalk.com. I'd love to keep this show alive as long as I can, and do so without ads. And I can really only do that with your assistance. So if you can, help spread the word. Share the show with your friends, with classmates, or even your professors. At evolutiontalk.com, you'll find more information, you'll find recommended books, and also ways to contact me. I'd love to hear from you. And I hope your week is going well. And until next time, please take care of yourself.
Darwinian fitness is an immediate or local concept. It doesn't accumulate over time into such patterns as increasing complexification or betterment. That is, the fish in a pond, which may be a hydrodynamic marvel of perfection and may have been there for 10 million years, knocking out species after species by virtue of its perfection of design, is still going to die if the pond dries up. So immediate local adaptations may represent a survival of the locally best fit, but the accumulation of those through time doesn't build into sensible patterns. That's where it's that translation to the larger geological timescale that engenders the lack of pattern, the randomness, the contingency, the unpredictability.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.